Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to YellowCard Vanguard. Before we get started with today's video, I've got a few quick shoutouts to make. The first being to this channel's sponsor, Strictly Broken TCG. As always, thanks for supporting us. More on that at the end. And the main shoutout are to the people who helped make this video a possibility with their insight and advice. So thank you very much to Nicky Goldman, Tjaden, Maxime Solemn, Hal Satchwell, and Andrew Hesford. Thank you very much, guys, and I'll repeat your names at the end. But for now, let's get into today's video. So, as you can guess from the title, we're talking about Dark Irregulars, specifically Dark Irregulars in Premium and their dominance over the years. So Dark Irregulars have always been a prominent force within Premium, pretty much ever since they got released, with one or two gaps in between. So let's take a look at the history first and see where the deck came from and how it evolved over the years, before taking a look at why it was dominant and the strengths that it had going into the formats. So where does the story begin? Well, it doesn't actually begin with Gastile. It actually begins with No Life King. That's right, VBTO2, which was one of the first sets introduced in the reboot, gave us one of the boss units that has survived until this very day. The moment this card was revealed, everyone looked at it and was like, oh my god, Enigmatic Assassin, right? And the combo from there was just set in stone. The deck was already very solid from the beginning because of what NLK did, and the fact that Enigmatic Assassin wasn't GB locked, so you weren't slow like the previous G format decks. The only floodgate that the deck had was the amount of soul charging it needed to do, and the fact that you could do that so easily from the strength of the V-Series soul charging, combined with the already powerful soul charging from old cards such as Dimension Creeper, completely negated this. But more on this later. In short, you had multiple assassins that would spend the game shoving into soul, and the moment you hit that magical 13 soul threshold, you would spend X counterblast and attack with your Vanguard X times, each time with a crit and being in excess of over 50,000 power, all the while gaining protect markers. One notable build of the deck during this time was Maxime Solemn's Turbo deck that he piloted to a first place win at BCS in 2018.
So the funny thing about that whole process of getting to the Franz build is actually really weird, because at first I spoke to Andrew, Ridria otherwise known, about DI for like a while, and he had mentioned something like it, but then we spoke so much about a different build actually, Ghoulish Despoiler. So for the longest time, we were going ham on like, oh, Ghoulish Despoiler can give us a +1, because it's kind of like Imperial Daughter, but it gives us specific cards with Baleful Repressor and stuff like that. And then it basically ended right there. I don't think we spoke much, and then I went back and forth between so many decks, but I just didn't like the way DI felt. Like, you were running all these cards like Serpent Charmer and all these GB-based cards, and while sure, you would get your DI, your NLK consistently, it wasn't quite as reliable, especially in the mirror. The mirror felt very dice rolly, like who could deny, but then still stride, but then still get the skill off first. It was a really weird meta. And so I started watching WGP footage, and you had Ryan Kai over there playing a faster NLK build. And so he would literally just very often grade 2 game for a little and then ride up and just kill right there. And I was like, that's very interesting, because that makes you faster than the other NLKs. Like, most NLKs needed to stride once, and then that was it. After that, they could start their loop. But usually they needed that one stride. And so he just went over that. Like, he didn't even care. And I figured that was really smart. But how could we make that even more consistent? So the first thing I did, I think he ran like 8 draw, 8 crit. And so I thought, okay, not running heals is smart, because you can't deny yourself either, because that did happen. And beyond that, that also made it so you run a solid amount of crits, which means your opponent tends to be at a slightly higher damage. If he's forced to take like an NLK swing because it's getting too big and he's already out of PGs, a random crit can be 3 damage suddenly. And so crits were definitely in. I did, however, notice that having not enough charging pieces by turn 3 was a real issue. So over time, I went from the 8 crit 8 draw to 12 draw, because I literally just wanted to hit like 2 or 3 draw triggers. Well, 2 actually was enough to get enough pieces to always hit 13 soul when riding. Now, this worked when going second, but when going first, you missed 1 drive check. And that was so a -1 basically, which made me not consistently hit it until I added the Yellow Bolt. And I specifically remember literally reading every single Dark Irregular card. So at that point, I had the Turbo list, 12 draws, everything is a charging piece, no Stand Cat, no Bobo, none of the stuff everyone is running. But Yellow Bolt wasn't in yet, and I just kept scrolling and scrolling, and I even checked my my wiki history. Literally every card alphabetically you see until Yellow Bolt, which was like one of the last cards because it's Y. And that was when it clicked. Like that, together with the 12 draws and the Turbo build, I consistently just hit it. So every single time I would ride up and the loop would be live. So I have 1 CB, okay, I'm gonna loop for 1 CB. I have 2 CB, okay, I'm gonna loop for 2 CB. Every single time I could loop, it was just over. And so at the time, DI wasn't mega known yet, so everyone wasn't really denying that hard. And the people that did deny, actually one of my, I think round 4 opponents was Ling Joker. He denied me at 1. Little did he know that 1 was enough, because he played Geese. So 1 damage, but with a bunch of assassin attacks, while he's on grade 2. And then my NLK swings on top of that, like that was enough for the kill. So I remember talking to him like after the game, he really didn't like that he gave me the 1 damage, because 1 damage was just enough. Very often even 2 was enough, whereas the generally accepted way of playing NLK was like, oh, once we have 3 or 4 damage, then we're definitely winning. But it's like, nah. If you're going that fast, 1 or 2 is enough for an instant kill.
Assassin eventually got restricted to 1 copy in February of 2019, meaning that instead of running the V starter and just relying on soul charging the assassins manually, you were now forced to start with the assassin to guarantee that you had it, and thus losing the free draw of the V starter. There are a few of the downsides to this as well, including the fact that you now didn't have an excess amount of Vanguard attacks. You now capped out at 3 plus 2x, where x was the amount of counterblast you had. Instead, now you're reliant on Master of the 5th element, and to be able to get your extra 5th or 6th attack in. The deck was really defanged. The Turbo build was no longer viable due to the lack of an effective kill condition, and the fact that people had realised that the deck lost the counterblast, and the previous build, which was relying on strides and G pieces, was a little bit too slow because of its reliance on Generation Break. This combination of factors of being a little bit too slow and a little bit too easy to counteract, while also at the same time not presenting enough of a threat to win the game, was what pushed DI out of Tier 1 for a few short months. Gasteel Diamonass in Premium Collection 1 was still a very welcome addition to the deck. By guaranteeing access to your Master of the 5th element and the No Life King, you increased the amount of consistency you had. It also gave a power boost to the front row, giving you a little bit more threat compared to before, and it also unlocked your GB requirement straight away, meaning that the moment you strode was probably the moment you were going to go for your kill combo. Of course, compared to the other styles of Premium Collection, DI was still lacking in its early game, and its win condition was still not 100% there yet in all edges. And not having that defense in the early game really held it back, especially during that summer of Ezel and Katrina and Ichikishima. Of course, it wasn't until the release of Phantasmal Steed Restoration that the deck really came into its stride and got a new lease on life, thanks to a variety of new tools in the form of Killer Tail and Rhodia. Killer Tail was what really changed the deck. It gave you much faster soul charging, it gave you reliable soul charging because you now had selection rather than just blind soul charge, and it also potentially refunded you the valuable resources that you needed to combo off and win the game with. And DI, being DI, would always get these random pluses alongside its soul charges, meaning that it could now survive a bit more effectively into the late game, into its stride turn. On top of that, you then had Rhodia, being Rhodia, gaining loads of power for no reason, giving you more early game defensive power, while also giving you the ability to damage deny the important decks by being a under 10k beta.
So the reason why Rhodia is so good in the deck is just because of how versatile it is in their different matchups. So on the first grade 2 turn, you could use it to damage deny because its lowest power would be 7k, which being your starter and your grade 1, and then you could easily buff it up to over 10, 11k with cards like Emblem Master and Killer Tail. Making your grade 2 turn grade 2 game and just grade 2 turn crazy powerful, and that's the reason why Rhodia is such a good card, and it being 10k shield is just over the top. I don't know, I actually have no idea why it's 10k shield. And then on your crazy combo turns, if you feel you can't kill them, you just ride back down into Rhodia. And most decks can't get over a 23 or maybe even 33 or 32k base Vanguard, which is Rhodia. and depending on like how much you soul shred that turn. And that's why it's like such a like powerful like defense and offensive deck.
Having Phantasmal come out didn't get rid of all of the deck's aspects, but it just made it stronger in every single way possible, and that was enough to really push it into the highlights of Tier 1. Going into the 2019 BCS and World season, the premium format was largely in a 3-deck meta. You had Ezreal, you had Katrina, and you had Gasteel. Now, Ezreal was significantly more popular due to its ability to run away with games by high rolling, and Katrina was also very popular due to its ease of access and low skill floor. The deck wasn't autopilot as some people say, but it was definitely easier to play than Gasteel. So because Gasteel doesn't have these factors of easiness, access, and potential to just win games for no reason, it was obviously a lot less popular. And aside from the release of Phantasmal occurring partway into the 2019 season, other factors such as the difficulty of accessing Dimension Creepers and Monochromes made the deck very hard to build and pick up for some players. Beyond that, the deck also required significantly more foresight and planning into its kill turn and its early game compared to the other decks. Knowing what to guard and what to not guard was what really put a DI player above other players, because rather than having all your resources matter right now, every single card mattered for your combo, and it was planning around that and knowing how much damage you could afford to take is what really took to maximize the effectiveness of the deck.
Alright, so when DI got its support in Phantasmal Steed, it became one of the 3 best decks in the format with Ezreal and Neo Nectar. The matchup going into Neo Nectar was a lot easier because we got like Emblem Master, Raldia, Yellow Bolt, and then Killer Tail, so you had the early game options when you were given like a ton of damage, which Katrina would usually do, otherwise they would deny you, then like try and kill you, and then probably wouldn't work, and then you could just Gasteel them. So your game plan, unless you bricked against that deck, was usually really good, because you'd either NLK loop back down into the promo Raldia, or you'll just bash him in the face with Gasteel. But the Ezreal matchup was a lot more tough, because they could like ride jump, you couldn't give them like any damage, because like Neo was all free apart from like Erminsil, so giving them damage in the early game wasn't really a bad thing, but Ezreal could like ride jump, they could get more Axel, they could draw more cards, so you had to be like really careful. It was a really technical matchup with like how much damage you had to give them or how much damage they had to give you. And then Luard, I guess, was the other really good deck, but that was a matchup I never really got to test because I didn't know anyone else that had the deck, so I'd be playing against myself. It could adapt for it really well because it had like the Cocoon, Fall and Dive, and all of that stuff was you could recycle it with Coolbow. And obviously Morpheus is like 2 crit swings, so you can give them low, if any, damage, and then try and control the pace of the game a bit more. The only other decks that I can think of that were like really good at that time were Granblue, Great Nature, and Kagero. And both Kagero and Great Nature had counters to DI, and like this is before, if we're looking at before Isabel, Great Nature would just 0 damage you, and then Zoa, because you had like no out. Kagero would have like Denial Griffin and Defeat Flare to clear your back row so you couldn't actually perform your loop. And then Granblue was probably the best, like, of those other matchups, it's probably the best one for you. But even then they could like breed shape their perfect guards back, their heals back, and they had like protect markers. So it wasn't always easy.
Even outside of the actual game itself, the decisions made during deck building factored massively into how the deck performed. Decisions to include Bobo or not, the exact lineup of grade 1s beyond Killer Tail and Creeper, and then finding ways to balance the deck's early game versus its late game. Some players, such as Kyotogen of WCC, even opted to play Edel Rose into the V Series Werewolf Seeger just to get that guaranteed early game and to be able to play grade 2 effectively to fight for first stride. Meanwhile, other players were torn between Hope on Damp and Number of Terror. For example, Andrew Hesford from the UK popularized the Number of Terror build to give you a bit more of a survivability against Ezreal decks.
Alright, so the deck I played at Worlds this past year was DI. I played it because I thought it was the best deck. So for that build, I ran 4 Number of Terror and 2 Bluefish, and everything else was basically the same as my previous builds, 3 Bobo and etc., 3 Rodeo. And I played this because like this version with Number of Terror because I thought I covered all of my bases. Neo Nectar, like it was mostly just the core build that beat it. So Rodeo, being able to like out grade 2 game them, or or ride up to 3 and just combo them off and ride back down to 2, and they literally can't do anything. Or if they do get destroyed, like I just hope they don't like triple crit me or double crit me, and I just try and kill them next turn. So yeah, I like force them into a position where they have to ride up to 3, or they have to grade 2 game me, and hope I don't combo them to death. And then against the mirror match, it was mostly just like how well I can play, how well I can damage deny, when I should ride up, when I should spike. And then against golds, that's when like number terror really helped. So it was just a card that like helped me combo off really hard and drew me a ton of cards. And it also was 10k shield also. So it was just more shield in general, because like I just needed shield against that deck. And then on my like combo turns, number terror was like crazy, because like they don't have a crazy defense unless they have a huge hand. And if they have a huge hand, like you just like try to like get through it all and live their next turn. So that's like mostly the reason why I ran number terror. And it was just better than Hope, because Hope relies on me like having a ton of cards in hand, and Golds is just gonna mow my hand down, and I'm not gonna have that hand against them. So yeah, that's the reason why I think DI was one of the best decks at Worlds.
Despite having very low representation, however, the deck was still a very, very powerful contender, with prominent players such as Andrew and Nicky performing very well with those decks. There were also lots of similar variants in the JPWGP circuit, also finding a strong success, utilising cards such as Variance Hard Leg or Cutting Brufus for concentrating on the Master of Fifth Element. And even now, we're in the latter half of 2020, we still see Dark Irregulars as an extremely powerful force in the meta, one of the top 3, that people are saying as part of the big 3. The ban list of early 2020 removed Ezreal and Katrina from the 3-deck format, leaving DI as the uncontended de facto number 1 deck. Of course, there were no other events in Springfest to prove that essence, but a lot of people knew that this was the deck to be afraid of. And it wasn't until we got Premium Collection 2 that things really started to change, with decks such as Murakumo Nue Dio and Vanilla Engines coming out to contest this DI's unparalleled stride kill potential by threatening its early game. While Premium as a whole did speed up to the detriment of Dark Irregulars, the fact that Dark Irregulars was able to get going with so little effort compared to other combo decks such as Victor or Genesis meant that it was still a very strong force to be reckoned with. We'll talk about why in a bit, but first, let's talk about what's coming up next in DI's future. VBT09 Butterfly to Moonlight introduces Charlotte Vampire's V-Series retrain, and with it, 3 more attacks on the combo turn and an extra power pump to your front row. You can still run a very greedy lineup of grade 3s thanks to Gasteel fixing that issue, and having Gasteel to copy both NLK and Charlotte equals a full front row restand during the battle phase, carrying with it Gasteel's massive power pump, compared to before where you would lose it once you reroll into Master of Fifth Element. While Charlotte's combo line isn't strictly better than the double NLK line, it adds not only flexibility to the deck's win condition, but it also extends your defensive power by enabling multiple uses of Number of Terror in a line of play not too dissimilar to what we see in standard Dark Irregulars.
I think once Premium Collection 2 hit, well, 2020 hit, the big issue they have is that quite some decks got faster. Like you have the Cray Elemental engine, which makes it so if DI gives that first damage when the other ones go first, they can superior ride on them. And DI doesn't like fast decks. Like even in the Worlds meta, Neo Nectar could be scary if they just 3-lined bash, 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 ride up, bash, bash. They could randomly die. Because a lot of DI players are still playing the Enigmatic Assassin as their starter, which puts you at a -2 now from the start if you count Quick Shield. And so that makes you very fragile, especially because you're also running the Stand Cat, so that's even less shield. So Cray Elementals, Murakumo, that stuff really made it harder for DI. But then on the other hand, they got Huang. So that definitely helps them a little bit with stopping some of the damage denial decks from stopping them. Then we get VBT09, which just came out. Sherrod is very interesting to me, obviously. The ability to just search an NLK plus a Sherrod, and because you did that, automatically making your entire front row even bigger, automatically doing CB1 to stand 2 lanes, that is just really good. The only issue is that you can't quite like assassin multi-attack while keeping the power from the Sherrod, but that's just a sacrifice you have to make. The only issue is that it costs quite a lot of CB, but when you've got that CB and you got access to the play, why not? I think it's an automatic, at least one-off. You don't have to run many Sharod, because if you have it, cool, let's high roll. If you don't, cool. There's some other interesting cards in VBT09, but overall I think that's going to be a major one. Succubus of Pure Love is kind of interesting, because if you are doing the grade 2 game thing, or you want to be able to ride up into NLK consistently, being stuck with all of these grade 3s can really hurt. Like, a lot of players play a Brufas or a Sharod now, or a Number of Terror. If you misride after that grade 2 game, that sucks. Like, I remember talking to Nicky Goldman, and I would do the same, but he would throw away like his grade 3 so he could G assist into an NLK, and that feels bad, you know. So Succubus is interesting, but I don't think we have a lot of room for her, sadly. Apart from that, I also noticed some people run Demonted Executioner. Now, of course, if you're getting rushed, as you could be in this kind of format, you could definitely run that, but it does take quite a bit of CB, so in any matchup where you're going to be denied, Demonted is going to feel pretty bad. I don't know about any other major cards that come from the set, but those would be the biggest offenders, let's say, that I would be looking at.
So that's a rough history of the deck, but now let's take a look at how and why it's been such a strong performer throughout its entire time in Premium. The first is an examination of the win condition itself. Multiple large Vanguard swings, and later on multiple large Rearguard swings, hasn't actually always been, that impressive, right? We've had it before with X-Gallop, Gearnex, and Tirawa, but what pushes NLK over the edge is how easy it is. The fact that Solemn was able to build a turbo build in 2018 that would consistently win the game on turn 3 regardless of going first or second says a lot to how easy that 13 threshold really is. During the first part of the deck's life, it also had repeated restands, and it was one of the few decks in Vanguard that could achieve more than 3 Vanguard attacks in one turn. And the other ones, mainly Victor and Overlord, required a lot of specific resources to get there. Even after Assassin became limited, you now relied on an extremely chunky Rodeo, who got even chunkier thanks to Gas Steel, combined with stand triggers, which you are usually favored to hit because of your deck thinning power, and therefore could attack multiple times. Adding Number of Terror into the mix just threw even more rocks at the glass, meaning that defensive triggers could only do so much. The second strength was its resource manipulation. This is a much deeper facet, so let's start off with damage denial. With the exception of Emblem Master, Gasteel itself, and NLK itself, most of the deck was not counterblast reliant at all, and beyond Emblem Master, most of its counterblast usage came in the late game after striding, meaning that Bobo was now an incredibly relevant card in the deck, not to mention because of its soul charging. There was also Monochrome, the stand trigger, which helped to refund any resources used up until that point, while also being a straight +1 to soul for no cost. And beyond that, access to the number of underpowered grade 1s, such as Killer Tail and the Old Creeper, meant that the deck itself was very difficult to damage deny as well. Beyond that, having the underpowered grade 1s also meant that the deck could damage deny its opponents, and it did that very effectively. It could 0 to 6 people very, very simply thanks to the strength of NLK and Master of Fifth Element, and you would have to deny and 0 to 6 Dark Irregulars yourself in order to reasonably stand a chance, which was of course very difficult when they're farming protect markers. The third big reason into the strength of DI was its raw versatility. Almost no other deck in Premium has done what DI has done, in that it has its win con with several different branches and several different variations. Even beside the finishing combo, its early game was also very versatile. You had Rodeo that could either be used to damage deny and be a grade 2 with less than 9k power, or you could tank it up with lots of soul charges and become an oversized grade 2 so that you couldn't get rushed. That and being 10k shield also made a big difference. Being able to go first and use NLK's skill to ride back down to Rodeo maintaining pressure while also denying your opponent first stride was another strong line of play that the deck had access to.
So the game plan with DI, I usually actually just make it up as I go. Like, I don't really have like a, before the game starts, oh, I know I'm gonna do this and that. No, it depends on what grade 1 I ride, what cards are in my hand. So let's say I ride like Yellow Bolt as my starting van. There I already have like 2 soul. If I have Emblem Master and like another card that brings me another like 3 soul, plus like each card I'm riding. So usually I won't ride a 3 unless I know I can either get 13 soul, I could stride, or I really need the like protect marker, and then I'm gonna like die next turn, you know. And if I can't get the 13 soul, usually like I'll just count it. Like my grade 2 is 1 soul, and then like depending on like NOK, soul charge should be another, and Killer Tails and Secret Busan, all that etc. stuff. And so I'll usually just base my game plan as I play. And if you just can't get 13 soul, you can't stride, there's just no reason to go to 3.
Beyond that, the deck had other ways of fighting for first ride. For example, sitting back and letting Killer Tail just continually soul charge your resources that you guarded with, or the aforementioned Edelrose v Seeger combo, which helped you grade 2 game your opponents.
I really think you can't overstate how much advantage DI gets from an opponent playing suboptimal. Like, if you played against Neo Nectar in the Katrina Ezel DI format, you playing suboptimal didn't really change much. Neo was just gonna bash your face in, and whether or not they had CB was utterly irrelevant. But when you gave Ezel 2 CB, they could just go off. But if you gave DI 2 CB or 3 CB, it was game over. And so a lot of wins in Swiss that DI got throughout, well, basically all the seasons it was relevant in, I feel, was because a lot of people just weren't playing around them. And so even right now, I feel a lot of its power comes from that lack of knowledge. And you basically always need to assume that at least a portion of the players won't have that knowledge. So that's definitely a very scary part about the deck, I feel. But perhaps as people learn better how it works, it too will lose some of its potency.
Of course, the deck wasn't infallible. It did have some weakness. It was reliant on seeing some combination of Emblem Master, Killer Tail, and Dimension Creeper early on in order to be able to reach its soul thresholds, but it did that fairly often. And if the deck had to gas steal for Brufus, then there was a dismal line of play where you could interrupt the deck's ability to double NLK by forcing them to Brufus their own rearguard. The deck wasn't completely broken, but it was definitely unstoppable. Even being rushed, if you couldn't guarantee the kill on the grade 3 turn, you risk them striding and having 5 counterblasts to soul charge and work with, and if you took too long, you risk them just naturally hitting the 13 soul threshold, top decking a Bobo, and comboing off anyway. Let me give you an example. I myself only beat Dark Irregulars in the finals of London BCS because A, I got 2 defensives, and B, he didn't have enough resources to push for the second NLK restand safely. Nicky himself was knocked out of top 8 at Worlds this year because his Ezel opponent high rolled just a little bit too much and he couldn't keep up. Of course, everything I've said so far holds true for any deck going forward, and unless the metagame progresses to a point where the early game rush is significant enough that DI can no longer consistently survive to its stride turn, then definitely it will lose a little bit of strength and it will lose a lot of place in the meta. However, the fact that it can do all of the things that a premium deck needs to do, which is damage an eye, plus, rush, and have a guaranteed kill, will likely keep it within the upper echelons of premium for a while to come yet. I do think that when Bushiroad gave us the big old premium guillotine in February 2020, Gastiel or NLK should have definitely gone with it, but as we've established, Bushiroad bounces by usage, not by raw strength, and that means that there's a very, very good chance that DI will never get hit until it gets power crept. And people just don't play DI for reasons that even I still don't understand. You know, it's been the best deck in the game a fair few number of times and has never ever come first in usage statistics. Taking a look at what few premium results we've had this year should be an indicator that people aren't playing the best decks, which are premium Murakumo with the new Dio build, various Pale Moon builds, and Dark Irregulars. Note that when I say that DI was the best decks at any given point in time, it did not mean pick up DI, win tournaments. It meant that DI was the most reliable option to get first place at a tournament, granted that you could pilot it effectively and make the correct decisions in deck building and gameplay. It's very hard to say where Dark Irregulars goes from here because we don't know anything about Overdress, but what we do know is that as long as Gastiel exists, Bushiroad has to be very, very careful about what grade 3s it designs for Dark Irregulars. As long as Dark Irregulars keeps getting good soul charge effects and soul cost-effective pluses, NLK consistency will never ever go down. But the deck's ability to both be a consistent threat while also having tools to deal with different situations is almost certainly what keeps it on top. If anything, it's actually a little bit weaker now compared to the Worlds format, now that you've got Premium Collection 2 with new Dio and vanilla engines rushing down and abusing Dark Irregulars' early game. But the fact that the deck has remained a viable contender throughout the entire 2 years it's existed in Premium speaks a lot about what the deck has been capable of throughout its Premium lifespan. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you very much for watching up to this long. Hope you found this video interesting. It was certainly very interesting to make and speaking to everyone about their excessive insight into Dark Irregulars. As always, thank you for Strictly Broken TCG for sponsoring the channel and this content, and if you're interested in buying Sharper at Vampires to update your Premium Dark Irregulars deck, you can use the code SBTCG YellowCard at checkout on your playset of VBT09 Dark Irregulars. Once again, thank you to John, Maxime, Nicky, Hal, and Andrew for their help and insight and their feedback into this video, and finally, thank you for watching. hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you want to keep up with our content, feel free to subscribe to the video channel, leave a like on the video, leave a comment, keep up to date with what we're doing down in the description below, and hopefully we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye bye.